Hey everyone, welcome to this month's Tracy Developer Meetup. So we have a special guest today. His name is Yang Zhang, and he's going to be talking to us about building UIs in React visually using Plasmic. But before we get into the meetup material, I want to go over a few logistical items first. So the first item is if there's any kind of audio video problems, maybe my microphone sounds incredibly loud, or maybe you can't hear me at all, or maybe the video goes dark, let me know. This is a live stream, so there could be problems, and unless somebody tells us, generally we probably won't know about them. Go ahead and engage in the chat. So we want to hear from you. So if you've got a question for Yang, if you've got a question about the meetup group, ask it. I'll go ahead and pause Yang, and he'll be able to answer it to the best of his ability as well. When it comes to this particular group, so we meet once a month. It's generally on a Friday, not all the time, but generally on a Friday. And for the rest of the year, we will actually be meeting online through Twitch. So depending on how everything pans out in 2021 in January, that's when we may try to do the in-person events again here in Tracy, California. But until then, we're just going to stick with the online stuff. So is there anything that you want to add, Yang, before we get started?
No.
Then I will switch the scene, and it will be all you. So you're up.
Awesome. All right. Hey, everyone. Let's see. I'm going to share my screen as well.
We do see your screen.
Is it coming through?
Yeah, we see it. It says Plasmic Talk Slides.
Okay, great. Perfect. All right. So yeah. Hey. So my name's Yang. I'm an engineer working on this project called Plasmic, and working on it with a very small and wonderful team. And so thank you for joining in and listening. I'm excited to just be here and share a little bit about Plasmic, which is something that actually started a little while back as a passion project. And it's something I hope can be useful to all React developers, but also just interesting to learn about and talk about as a React project itself. It's certainly been a very large source of challenges, technical challenges, other kinds of challenges. So anyway, we'll get right into it. So what is Plasmic? Plasmic is basically a visual UI builder, and wanted to solve two different problems with it. So the first goal that we had was from our experience working on product teams and building a lot of React applications and front ends generally, working with designers for a long time. And so on these product teams, collaboration with design can be complex and time consuming. So you have designers who are, they're creating high fidelity vector drawings that engineers have to recreate essentially from scratch, by hand using code. Inevitably, there's a lot of things that can get missed in this translation process because it turns out that we as developers actually really suck at catching all the details, or are just hard to translate because designs are entirely free-form drawings. And so this leads to a lot of back and forth with designers, and ultimately you have these two sources of truths on these product teams that are never truly in sync by most teams' admission. So we wanted to kind of streamline that collaboration and that translation process. But the second goal we had was this is actually much more selfish, just to rethink what developer experience can look like for those of us working on UIs. This so we can build a lot faster, but at the same time, maybe even eliminate an entire class of visual bugs and QA and related tooling. GUI builders are not a new category. They're very actually widely used. Generated perfectly fine code that ships into all sorts of major apps for a long time. Very successful on other platforms like iOS and Android and Windows, where you have a clear kind of company backing the platform. So we wanted to bring some of that experience to the web. So Plasmic is that. It's essentially a visual UI builder to let developers or designers, I think in the longer term, we do want to welcome designers into the product as well. But today focused on developers, letting you craft these complex presentational components that can integrate into your real world code base. So the idea is to let you, move faster and also at the same time shoot for fixing designer developer collaboration. So that was a lot of words, kind of setting the stage for why we work on this. But I'll switch gears now into a demo of the product. So I'm gonna switch to my other tab here. So this is kind of what the tool looks like. I'm just going to start a new project. And actually for this demo, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be building out To-Do MVC, everyone's favorite sort of example app. This is what it looks like, just as a refresher. So we're actually not going to build the whole thing. We're just going to build a small subset of this in Plasmic just to get a sense of what it's like to create these things from scratch. And I say from scratch because this is one of the workflows that we were targeting. Another workflow is if you already have designs created by a designer in something like Figma, you can actually import that. And we do all the low-level conversion of like those vector graphics into the DOM representations. And so from there, you can refactor it into like proper hygienic, React component structure. So anyway, this is the flow of the tool right now. And the look and feel is intended to actually look to bear a resemblance to these design tools if you're familiar with them. It's fine if you're not. The idea is that we want to give you kind of this canvas where you can do, even very freeform, rough drawings, just slap things on the screen, absolute positioning everywhere, and from there refine it into something that is a lot more robust, more real for production. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start add some text for the title here at the top of the screen. I'm going to give it a sort of this light red color, make it really thin. A bunch of freeform styling and drawing tools available. Let's see, and down below it, I'm going to create the card for my first task in this to-do app. I'm actually going to set the background of the whole page to be this sort of off-white, warm gray, kind of look for the right color there. And then this card I'll set to pure white. And so this is kind of the flow that we want to enable with this app, is just essentially being able to very quickly iterate on the visuals of the app and get like instantaneous feedback. No hot reloading or fidgeting around with flex spaces or popping open your Chrome DevTools inspector and stuff like that. Just really thinking about the performance. So let's see, maybe buy some milk is my task name. And then, so this is basically my first task. I'll style the text a little bit more here. I'll make it a little bit lighter in the gray. And I'll actually save this color as a reusable color token called text color, like so. All right, so that was pretty much it for creating this task. Now, of course, I want a bunch of these in a to-do app. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click this thing and create a component out of it. And I'll call this thing my task component. And from here, I can actually create a bunch of instances of this thing. And so, I'm just kind of roughly arranging things vertically on screen. And I'm just creating this mock of, what essentially the tool should, this app should eventually look like. Now let's say I want to actually have these tasks that I've kind of softly arranged ordered and in a real sort of layout. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lasso these into what's called a vertical stack. And what these stacks do is they're essentially, you can think of them as like Flexbox, but with extra bells and whistles on top. So the idea is really we're trying to streamline and make a lot more intuitive layout on the web, which today dealing with CSS layout can sometimes be infuriating. So anyway, I'm going to remove the background color here, and I'm going to snap, for instance, everything to the top and to the left. I'm also going to double click these edges to make things auto size to the content vertically and also horizontally. These are some of the simple examples of what you can do. I'll show some more interesting examples later on of layout. So I'm going to call this element my task list. And this is just to keep my layers organized, but also to help me later on when it comes to code generation. So this is my task. Right now, the app is kind of boring because everything says the same thing, buy some milk. but so in fact, I want this text to be different on these different tasks, and in fact, I want it to be variable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click this component to drill into editing it. In this mode, any changes I make to a component are reflected across all the instances of the component, as you would expect. And the text here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click it and convert it to what's called a slot. And what these slots do is it's kind of like poking a hole in the component. So from outside of this component, from any one of these instances, I can select the slot and essentially, fill it with whatever arbitrary content I want. So you can think of it as like, the children prop in React, which is a standard convention. So, some things I can do is actually just, double click this thing and change the text. So, I don't know, make to-do app, give a demo. But you can really fill up the slots with arbitrary content, whatever you want. So it's a easy way to get composition. Now, the last thing I want to do with these tasks is introduce state. So I actually want to make them look different in different states. For instance, my completed state. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to pop this task component out into its own new artboard on the right here. So what this does is it lets us work on this component and edit it in isolation. And this is just convenient for the same reason. If you're familiar with storybooks, sometimes being able to work on components in isolation is nice. So here I'm gonna actually use what we call variants. This is the main way that we represent state in components. So for instance, I'm going to add a group of variants called states, and I'm going to say that the first state here is my completed state, for instance. Maybe I have another state that is my editing state, maybe another one that is my state when it's marked high priority, and essentially I can change what this component looks like and even what's inside of it within any one of these variants. So I'm going to select the completed variant here. And for this demo, I'll just design out what this completed state looks like. But essentially, we want a checkbox or a check mark in that checkbox. So I'm going to switch back to that example app here because I like the look of that check mark here. And I'm just going to screen grab it real quick. And whoops, did I not do that right? Great. Okay. I'm going to switch back here, and I can actually just go ahead and I'm editing this completed state right now. So any changes I make are going to be recorded as basically deltas, overrides into this completed state. So I'm going to just paste in that check mark here. I'm going to adjust it on a finer level. We give you this pixel alignment grid, and but you can also arrange things using auto layout, and essentially that is what I want my completed state to look like. So you can switch back and forth between my base and completed appearance. I can also actually just duplicate this artboard so I can see the two side by side. And I'll set this one to look at the normal appearance. This one is the completed appearance. And any changes I make to this thing are, this is not like two separate copies of the component. These are still the same thing, just like you would expect in real code. So if I'm moving this this checkbox around, it's still moving in the completed state as well. It's just that completed state is also recording overrides or deltas over the base appearance. So this is one of the deltas, is this the presence of this check mark. Maybe another difference that I want is for there to be this text here to be struck out and also made a little bit dimmer. Let's say maybe I want it to be this faint gray here. So yeah, you can really change up any part of the component that you want, and just see that reflected in the two.
Yeah, I have a
thing
question
about
for you.
variants is, oh yeah, please.
Yeah. So what states are available here, and can you use a mixture of them to create like an animation, or do they behave slightly different than that?
Yeah, great question. So the states are entirely up to you to define. So the way we went about it here was we actually just created and named all these different states for this task. And it can really come down to your app. Maybe you're creating a list with an empty state. Maybe back in this screen we would actually introduce two different states, like an empty state and a normal state. Or here we have these three, which are my completed and editing and high priority states. And for a button, you might have your primary button and your danger button and all these different variants as well. So yeah, basically anytime you want a component to look different in different circumstances, you can model that using variants. So that's you can create what states make sense. I think the second part of your question was can you remind me the second part of your question?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, if you're working with these states, could you use them to create a series of like an animation?
Oh
Like,
yeah, that's right. Um, uh, yeah, so you can actually from the code side of things, and I'll show you how to do that later on. But not in the studio yet. This is actually something we're working on, is letting you create these like simple transitions in between two different states of your component, so that you can actually just see it live here. But it's also easy to add from the code, and yeah, remind me to show that later.
we're getting another comment in the chat here. We're saying that the Plasmic site is closed alpha right now. So, are people able to sign up for this and follow along?
Yeah, great. Actually, I meant to open it up right before this. I'm gonna keep it open for tonight, so please go ahead and sign up. Let me just do that right now before continuing. Um, yeah, certainly everyone in this meetup watching this is very welcome to sign up and play with it. We'd love to get your feedback, and that's really the main thing that we would ask for, is just engaging us actively with your feedback. That's always gold to us. So I'm gonna turn it on.
And then we have other comments saying that they're excited to see what kind of output, as far as code goes, comes out of Plasmic.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into that. I also think that's the most interesting part. Cool. I've opened up signups, so please go ahead and sign up. So I should I should write the
Yeah,
URL.
is it just plasmic.app, or is there a special link for it?
Yeah, you can go to Plasmic app, and then there's like a login screen, and then from there you can create a new account.
Perfect. If anyone has trouble, I'll stop you again.
Cool. All right. Let's see. Yeah, so we were just creating these variants for the task component, and the uh, the thing about variants is that you can, just like in when you're combining, when you're thinking about states in React, you can have multiple different states active at the same time and overlapping. So for instance, if I wanted to introduce a hover state to this task as well, something that's orthogonal to these three states that I have here, I can do that. And so you can create as many of these groups of variants as you want. But actually, for the hover state, we have built-in special support for these like primitive things that you might today express using pseudo elements or pseudo selectors like hover, etc. So you can just go ahead and add hover, press, disabled, focus. These are all things that support. And so maybe whenever I hover over any part of this component, what I want is for this circle here, this check box, to become darker. So I'm just going to scroll down here and just directly set it to be darker. So that should be all you need to do. And then I can actually try this out in this live preview mode and just play with it. That's kind of the effect I want, but I notice actually that as I'm playing with it, I want for also this the pointer to change to a hand pointer. So I'm going to set the cursor to be pointer, and I'll try that out again. Okay, that's better. That's more what I'm going for. So yeah, these variants, they basically come with the component anywhere it goes. So back in my main screen, I can select any one of these task instances, and from the right here, you'll see all the variants and variant groups that you created. So for instance, I want to set the state to be completed for this middle one, just for the purpose of this mock. And I can also interact with the whole screen here. The hover effect is coming with the component anywhere it goes. It's a little bit subtle, but you can notice that we're combining both the hover and the completed state for this middle task here. So because all the overrides for any variant are just deltas on top of the base appearance. So that's why you can combine them. That's pretty much it for what I wanted to create for this to-do app. And we'll get into like the interesting code part very soon. I think the only other thing I wanted to do was I'll give this a name. I'll call this the to-do app component. So I have the task component and the to-do app component. These are the two components in my application. And maybe I'll just tighten this up with one final bit of like real layout here, because I kind of put everything in absolute positioning on the screen, but I'm gonna actually have everything be centered and maybe add a bit of padding to the top and bottom. And we'll have like these simple linters that kind of let you know if you still have any parts of your design that are actually still like absolutely positioned, or if that's stuff that you want to either bless or address.
So I have a question.
Yes.
So in regards to the UI, it looks like you've made it a very mobile friendly UI. Will Plasmic create a responsive design as well, or can you switch between what it would look like on various screen sizes?
Yeah, definitely. I will. I'm going to circle back to that
Perfect.
right after the code gen part, because I do want to show. I think that's actually one of the strong suits about this. Essentially, you would model different presentations of your to do app screen on these different devices like mobile and desktop, also using the same concept of variance. And so you can actually make some pretty dramatic differences in between like mobile and desktop layouts. So let's see. Then I think, yeah, so that's pretty much it. So now I can actually, the interesting part is getting the code out of this. And essentially what Plasmic does is it gives you these presentational components that you can run with and import into your code base. So I can, one very simple thing you can do is just quickly use our code sandbox integration. So from here you can, quickly spin up a code sandbox that will show essentially your full exactly what you created in the designer. And you can play with the code, you can inspect the code, etc. From here. But actually, what's more interesting is I'm gonna do this into a real code base that I have on my local host. So to get started there, you just press this code gen button, and we kind of give you these like 3 simple steps that guide you through what it takes to actually get some code into your own code base. And so I'll show this. We have this CLI that you can install. So I already have that installed, and I have in my terminal here actually just a very like bare bones create React app. I just ran create React app, but of course this can be like a real existing code base that you've worked on for a long time. Doesn't really matter. And just to show you what an empty create React app looks like, this is it running on the screen. And so from here, the first step is really just to install a CLI, and then after you have that, you can run this Plasmic init command, which is what you run the first time you want to get started using Plasmic in a code base. And this asks you some basic setup questions. We'll just go with the default here. And the last thing we'll do is, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, so I forgot that you were watching as well. Can you zoom in on your terminal? It's slightly small for a lot of people, I think.
Oh, got it. Yeah. Does this work?
You should be able to do Command Plus, I think.
Oh, okay. Whoa.
There you go. Yeah, that's probably fine. If somebody in the chat is having trouble seeing it, definitely drop us a message.
Cool. Yeah. So basically, you just run. I just ran Plasmic init, and then the next command I'll run is Plasmic sync, which actually pulls down the components. And so we'll do that, and we should see the 2 components that we just created being printed out here. So to-do app and the task component. Great. And now what I'll do is I'll open my code editor for this code base. Let's see. Here we go. So this is the boilerplate for all that spinning logo stuff that we had on the right. And I'm going to replace all this, delete it, and just get the to-do app itself onto the screen. Like so. I save, and there we go. So we have the, exactly what we created in the studio running as a pixel perfect rendition of what we're going for. Now, of course, this is just the static sort of mock that we created. You'll actually want to wire this up to your real data, your real event handlers, your real props, state management, router, blah blah. So for this, I'll show. You can just actually dive right into the to-do app component, and we'll take a look at what's going on here. So the file is super simple. All it is a very thin shell around a Plasmic to-do app, which is actually that dumb presentational component that I was referring to earlier. So essentially, this is what we do. We give you these Plasmic managed dumb presentational components that just render stuff onto the screen, divs and other components. And you from outside of this this Plasmic component, from your own to-do app component here, you can actually render wire up the real props, do all the state management, whatever you want. So so basically this file, this to-do app, is we generate this for you, but only as a starter. You can do whatever you want with this file. You can delete it. We don't really care. So what I'm going to do for this is I'm just going to actually wire this up to some quote unquote real data. So for instance, maybe I have some data that is in some states, like my list of tasks. And here I'll create some state here, and maybe this is my representation for tasks. And I'll just call this do stuff. I'll actually have 4 of these tasks. I'll do stuff, and I'll display them in the task list. So if you remember, we named this element earlier, so it's convenient for me to just reference it right now. And I'll say that I'm going to replace all of its contents. Instead of these 3 mocks, I'm going to replace them with the actual list of tasks that I care about. And for rendering them, I'll use the other component that we synced down, the task component. So like this. And so yeah, that's all it takes to get things wired up to the real props and whatnot that you actually care about. So besides replacing the contents of the children, you can also add any other props you want. Your real on-click handlers, blah blah blah. If for some reason you wanted on-clicks here, and same thing with the task component itself. So you can add on-clicks to like the check mark and everything. So it's so this is how you kind of work with the components from the code perspective. Now, the thing about this workflow is that it wasn't like this is not just a one-time code generation where we dump on you these like Plasmic to-do app, and then it's an ejection, and that's the end of the story. You can actually go back into the editor and continue iterating on the visuals, because in reality you have to iterate all the time. These are like long-lasting components. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch back into the editor, and just to show you actually this workflow, I'm going to have my editor on the left and my running React app on the right, so you can see the two. And I'm also going to go into my terminal here, and I'm going to run Plasmic Watch. And what this will do is it'll live stream the edits that I make in the editor into my code base. So I should see this running React app reflect my changes. So one simple change that we can make is we're going to make some violent edits to the layout of this thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch this whole list-based layout to a bunch of tiles, actually. So I'm going to double-click this component material into editing it. So I'm going to change the shape of this thing to be a little more boxy, look like a tile. And now I'm going to actually maybe turn on some real layout here. So everything was just like free-floating around in it before, but I'm going to turn on this row layout so everything's arranged in a row. I'm going to arrange everything to the top. I'm going to add some padding to around this thing, so maybe 8 pixels of padding. And I'm also going to take this checkbox here, and I'm going to pop it out of its position. And I'm actually going to move it down to the bottom right of the card, and I'll pin it to the right and to the bottom. So these are situations where absolute positioning is actually quite helpful. So like so, and then and that's pretty much it for what I want to change to the task itself. Now, of course, in my main screen, there's still kind of a range in this list, which is kind of wasteful of space. What I want is maybe I want them to be actually arranged tiled as rows, like so. So I'm going to turn on row layout. but now everything is spilling out the right edge of the screen. So I'm going to turn on wrapping so that things actually are wrapping around. I'm going to adjust the size of this thing a little bit. And I can't really tell the difference actually between the three tiles here. So I'm also going to add a bit of a gap in between items. So I'm going to add a column gap, but also a row gap in between the different rows. So these are some of the more interesting features in the kind of the layout engine that we have here. So you can think about how you might want to implement things like gaps in Flexbox in your code today in a cross-browser fashion. It's actually not. It's a little bit annoying. So these are just like very standard routine things that are handy to have. And the main thing is you're getting this instantaneous feedback as I'm iterating on this the visuals of the component. And so yeah, as you can see, as I was making changes to the presentational component, it was being reflected in the real running app. So that's kind of the workflow that we wanted to enable. Let's see. That was pretty much it for editing in this app. Oh, I think one thing that was being asked is the responsive design aspect. So I'll cover that real briefly. So this whole to-do app screen, let's say I wanted to make it, let's say we were going for a mobile first design. And so this is what it looks like on mobile, but actually on desktop, I want it to look a little different. Maybe desktop, what I want is, I'm actually just going to duplicate this artboard first, and I'll put it side by side with the original, but I'll make it, wider, let's say. And on desktop, let's say I'm going to create a variant here. We actually have a special variant group for responsive design called the screen variant group, and you can just create a new one called desktop here. And maybe this kicks in whenever your screen size is over, I don't know, like 500 pixels. And when this happens, maybe I want for, I don't know, like maybe I want this thing to be like super wide, and I want the title to also be like, I mean, it's already pretty huge, but I'll make it even more huge, like so. And yeah, that's really bold. So yeah, as you can see, as I was making those changes, like I guess this window was already over 500 pixels, so it was being reflected. Hopefully, if I shrink it down to under, is that?
We have a question in the chat as well. Is this going to produce SCSS or just regular CSS or something else?
So this actually produces plain CSS. And so this, you don't need to have SCSS pre-processing or anything in your build chain. So we kind of shoot for that lowest common denominator, so that, just like any other NPM library that you pull into your, that you import into your code base, it's, they may be upstream using like SAS or SCSS or less or what have you. And most of that is like shielded from you because the common distribution format is plain CSS. So yeah, you can see like as I'm resizing the screen, we get the kind of difference that we were going for. I guess 600 pixels is actually not as wide as I thought. So anyway, so yeah, that's how you can achieve responsive design. You can make a lot of things very. Maybe on the desktop, I actually want to hide the title altogether. Maybe I want to change the background to become, I don't know. We can just change it to be like red, and these are all things that you should be able to see reflected in the actual design as well. So yeah, that's pretty much the flow that we wanted to enable. Let's see, going back to the slides. So yeah, I think this is the interesting bit here, which is like getting into some of the challenges involved in building this kind of tool. There's a bunch of technical challenges. So one of the big ones was just a constant fact of life, which is that we're always like the state management infrastructure and how to architect that is like very front and center for this app, because there's a lot of moving parts, and it's very interactive, long-lived state, a lot of sprawling state. throughout the app. And the main thing is when you want drag operations to feel smooth, for instance, usually in these situations you have these pretty tight frame budgets. Like, if you want 60 FPS, you'll shoot for 16 millisecond frame budgets. And so jank and other sources of stutter are things that like your choice of how you handle state is gonna, and how you respond and react to state changes is going to be a big factor in how smooth your app feels. So just what that means practically for us is a lot of incremental fine-grained updates to in response to state changes. So breaking up that work so that these state changes can propagate throughout the app as discreetly and concurrently as possible. So what I mean by that is, for instance, when we make a change to one of these things like this, like one of these components, for instance, these are. It's not like we're locking the state of the app and synchronously updating this throughout all of our different artboards. This is actually something that we kind of break up into fine-grained work, and we kind of prioritize what's actually at the front and center, the objects that you have most in front of you, but we kind of lazily propagate those changes throughout the rest of the app in response. The other thing is the other aspect of latency is scalability. So what I mean by that is, here this is a very simple project with just a few artboards on the screen, but if you had like hundreds of these, that's where you really want to make sure, again, for the same reason, that you're breaking up these changes into lots of bite-sized chunks.
So we have a question in the chat. The question is, so I guess we're building individual pages, then handling our own routes. Is that correct or no?
Yeah, right. So exactly. The philosophy that we have here is we're not trying to be an end-to-end app builder or one of these like site builders or I think there's a lot of these out there already. The thing that kind of limits their applicability to a lot of the projects that we work on is that they're kind of like take everything or leave everything mentality. And so we wanted actually something that was a lot more flexible for developers as users. And in your code base, you probably already have like your own choice of state management, your own choice of routing framework, your own a lot of things actually, your own data store, backend. These are all things that we tried to not impose any opinions on, and so that's why we're focused on this lowest common denominator of just giving you some presentational components that you can wire up however you want to get exactly the real behavior that you want. So beyond the latency and scalability, another big challenge for us is thinking about code components. So by this, I mean, right now I was showing you the ability to kind of create things from scratch. But if you already have, like a lot of teams do, an existing design system or component library, or just your own components that you've already authored in code, you're not like working on a greenfield project like this to-do MVC, or you're using some library like Material UI or Ant or one of these popular packages. You should be able to bring those into the design tool as well and run with them. And so this is what we've been focused on a lot is this infrastructure for supporting this. So what this means is actually letting you point us at any sort of bundle of these existing components. And from there, we would surface the components into the studio and actually let you interact with them and drop them in and compose them together and play with the props on them, and interleave them seamlessly with the things that you are creating in the studio itself. So in order to handle that, there was a lot of work. There's just a lot of work that goes into this infrastructure for loading in these components, reflecting out all the different, understanding what props they take by reflecting out these interfaces from the components, whether you've documented that in TypeScript or prop types or some other system, and actually, having that reflected in a same way in the editor itself. And like, there are some things like distinguishing between, for instance, props that are just knobs that you configure on the side versus props that are like children props, where you kind of expect to be able to edit that like you would slots on the canvas itself, right? Just like drag and dropping things in there. I think on product challenges, one big one was just distilling layout into a small set of streamlines and intuitive controls. For instance, today, if you want to just take two text divs and you want that are sitting side by side, right, and you want them to horizontally stretch to fill the available space given to them, like you can try setting flex to 1, but you may or may not be surprised at the result there, right? Like there's always an explanation. Like, flex is, it multiplies, the flex row multiplies the flex basis. And for flex direction row, that flex basis defaults to width, and width defaults to auto, which in this case means max content size. So, what that effectively means is, these two text elements are growing at different speeds depending on like the text that's actually in them. So, this may or may not be what you want, but anyway, yeah, getting that's one recent example I was fighting with. But other things like just getting things to align with the baseline, your icons and your tags, or like do a combination of legacy and modern layouts, or sizing, thinking about sizing. These are all things that are so routine, but there's so many pitfalls, and layout is definitely one of the places where there's like a ton of technical debt in I think a lot of applications. Anyway, this is one of these areas where we wanted to really make it simple, because most of the time you just care about like, I just want this thing to stretch, or I just want this thing to fill the available space, something simple like that. And yeah, like in a small percentage of cases, you might want to reach for the advanced controls, which you can do, but for those common cases, just I want things to wrap content or be a fixed size, either pixel percent or like stretch, and that's it, and kind of unifying a lot of these different, like the 10 different ways to do that in CSS. So anyway, that's making layout intuitive. And then another product challenge was I mentioned at the start that you can import Figma designs into Plasmic. So we have this Figma plugin that lets you just basically do that, almost like a copy and paste operation. And the idea there is, the main things that make that hard is that Figma has its own sort of its own world of representing these elements that you create on the screen. So it has its own document representation, and it's our job basically to translate that into these standard web-based DOM representations. And there's just a lot of random things that once you get into the weeds, if you ever are confronted with translating a Figma design into code, you may start noticing this more. But just things like a very different layout system, a very different set of styling for what you call layers in Figma are these elements. You can set different blend modes on them, because it comes from more of a graphic design pedigree. So even just talking about blend modes on layers is a big giveaway. Talking about in CSS, you have like inner and outer shadows, but you can have centered borders in Figma, etc. So all these things, there's we try and automate a lot of the low-level conversion of these details into web-based standards, and from there, letting you just kind of refactor, do the higher-level refactoring of the structure of the UI to a more hygienic, lasting component-based structure that you would want to work with from the code. But I think of all the challenges, I think the main challenge that we've spent the most time thinking about is really this code integration piece. And so this is the one that I think that I find the most fun to talk about, because we're definitely not done with our work here. But I think we have actually two different stabs that are super interesting to me. So the goal really is, if you think about what's natural for visual direct manipulation, right? and what's natural for expressing code. We wanted to marry the best of both worlds and find like the most natural and flexible interface for bridging that. So, our job is basically, we want to take away the burden of keeping your code in sync with the design in an ongoing fashion, but at the same time, giving you, as a developer, complete, control and freedom to build and structure the component code as you see fit. And this is for necessary practical reasons, as well as aesthetic reasons, what I'll call it. And like the practical reasons are, I just need to instrument the real props or the real event handlers on my elements, right? But the aesthetic reasons are things like, I want to control what my component API looks like. I want to control what the prop interface looks like to my component, right? It might not like be this simple, like these tasks, these task components. Here I have this slot for dropping in things in there, like this children slot. But maybe I don't actually want my code task component to speak in terms of children. Maybe I want it to take like a task object or something like that, right? And render its own children internally. So that's what I mean by that. And so basically we have these two different approaches to code generation. So the first is what's called the presentational library scheme. And here we are actually, I kind of showed you this earlier, but this is basically what we were looking at here. You have this this dumb presentational component, which is managed by Plasmic. And whenever you are syncing or watching a Plasmic project, this basically gets regenerated. And inside, it's really just a bunch of divs and CSS and other component references that you can wire up from outside by referencing the individual element names and passing in the props that you want to override from here. So you have a lot of control that way. And you can also specify like what variant of a task or a component you want to render from here as well. So we don't really see that here, but actually I'm going to pull up the task component. So you can see like the state is the variant that you want to render things in. So I can like if I wanted everything to look completed all the time, I can just do that. And so they're all marked completed. So it's really easy to work with these things from a code perspective, and we just take care of all the presentational concerns. So so this is the presentational library scheme. We actually have a very different code gen scheme as well, which is really fun to talk about and show actually. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch. Actually, I'll talk a little bit about it first. This is called the direct edit scheme, and the idea here is that we're actually giving you directly the plain JSX that you can directly edit, and essentially as you're making changes, we continuously merge your changes back in with the latest presentational generated code. And you can think of this as almost similar to a rebase that we do if you're familiar with like Git's line-based rebase. But because we actually have the ancestry information for the the presentational code, so we can do that three-way diff. And of course, because we are also dealing specifically with JSX, we can use more JSX-specific syntax-aware, rebase rather than just a naive line-based rebase. So I'll give you some example of this. I'm actually going to go back to my code here. I'm going to pop open my Plasmic JSON file. This is just a config file. And in here, I'm going to change all the references from the default scheme, this black box scheme, to direct scheme, like so. And I'm going to save, and I'll force blowing away my existing components. And then we should be able to see, yeah, so this is the direct edit scheme. So essentially we have the the plain JSX tree showing up here. And what I can do is I can go back to my editor here. I'm actually going to make some things different. So for instance, I'm going to always reveal the title. And let's see, anything else I want to make different? No, that's pretty much it. I'll resync this code. And back here. Okay, cool. So essentially, this code is the plain JSX tree that you would expect from maybe if you were writing it yourself. But you can actually freely make changes and edit this thing to your heart's content. So, for instance, if I want to delete this task here, and I want to or maybe I want to wrap this thing in a loop, which is more realistic. Oh, right. And maybe I also want to actually wrap this whole thing in some kind of wrapper component. I don't know, maybe it's called, if you're using MobX or something, called observer. And maybe I want to add a div at the end here for my footer. And maybe I also want to add an on click to the title div here, like so. I can make all these changes, and you can see as I'm going to have my editor on the right and my my studio designer on the left, and I'm just gonna as I continue to make changes to the design, you can see those getting streamed into the code base here. Like if I add I don't know, add a div in the middle here, these are all making their way into the code. So it's just a very, very different type of approach to code gen. And right now, the two are actually both the presentational scheme and this direct edit scheme are very similar in terms of their are basically the same in terms of their expressivity, like what you can do with them, and their flexibility. So you can it really just comes down to your kind of preference on which scheme you prefer. And you can also mix and match both schemes in the same project, so from component to component. Feel free to let me know if you guys have questions on that. I think the code integration part is the most interesting to think about. Yeah.
No questions yet, but if they come in, I'll stop you, or I have plenty of questions for you towards the end, so don't worry.
Awesome. Cool. Let's see. So yeah, I think just to wrap up, I think the ultimate impact on our own workflow is, I think one big one is that if this design first mentality of thinking about mapping out even at a rough, with rough wireframes, and then from there refining it into something more robust. It's a more design first mentality, and it's nice because it kind of forces you to think about from a top down end goal perspective, what kind of product and experience you are going for. And then all the logic and, the actual engineering and code work that you do is directly in service to that. So it's the straightest path to, that end goal. So, it's about putting in some thought and building the right thing. I think the second aspect of the impact on the workflow is, and this is the thing that I'm super excited about, which is that the tool is something we've been trying to keep accessible to designers as well. So designers who are able to wield this thing, it's there's just something really magical about running Plasmic Sync, and then you have a nicer version of your landing page in your code base. It's incredible. It's just a random recent thing that we were working on. Yeah, our landing page is naturally built in Plasmic. So this is, I think, definitely a future kind of collaboration workflow that we want to explore a lot more. And the last impact on our workflow is, this helps us, because what you're working on is the final rendered output. It helps us eliminate a lot of these visual regression tests and manual queuing of, did my implementation line up with my my design or my mock, because it is a design. And so I think this is the most fun part about this for me, is just seeing people actually take off with this tool and build all sorts of crazy things. A lot of personal side hobby projects, and a lot of even real serious production deployed things. Like the most interesting, I think, is a control panel for these embedded sensor devices that sit in autonomous vehicles that like these LiDAR sensors. That's definitely the most out there one. So that's the one I would call out first. But of course, Plasmic itself is also built in Plasmic. I can even show like just quickly our very messy workspace for this. But somewhere here, yeah, Plasmic kit. Yeah, you can see, there's lots of different parts of Plasmic that are built out on Plasmic, and I'll kind of show like you've got a bunch of the like just random things like error banners and this our published dialog, our settings page where you load up your personal access tokens for the CodeGen integration, all sorts of buttons. All different variants of buttons. Buttons are usually great stress tests for variants generally. It's really, buttons are like one of the most primitive components you can think of, but they usually come in so many different flavors. Text boxes are simple toggles, or share dialogue. So this is, over here, when I pull this up, our code sandbox dialog. This is this one right here. Our various drop downs, our entire left pane here, all these different sections and managing image assets, etc. Our many icons, our dashboard page, which is like that main project list page that you can kind of see. Like this is one where you can explore all the different like nooks and crannies of the components. This is what it looks like when it's put together, and it's just like this screen here. This is actually one that is an example of one that we just imported from Figma, actually. So this is the original Figma source, and this is what it ultimately ends up looking like. So yeah, that is pretty much, I think, all I had for the talk. So I opened up signups, and so please go ahead and play with it, and we'd love to hear any and all feedback, questions you have, etc. Yeah, we'll be starting to share updates soon on Twitter, and please, yeah, just let us know all your thoughts. So thank you so much for listening.
Oh yeah, no, this is great, man. Until questions start trickling in, I have a lot of probably stupid questions, so brace yourself. First off, is there any way we can keep that registration open for the weekend, so that way I can get this video uploaded, sure, and we'll get the stragglers? All right, so next up, I don't know if I missed it or not. Can you, and I'm not deep in the React space, can you use Plasmic to develop UIs for React Native?
Great question. So you can't right now, and that is actually something that has come up quite a bit for us, just from talking to random developers. And yeah, I think that would be very, very exciting, and also very I think within reach. But right now we're just we just want to get like this core React experience right, and then from there, yeah, branch out into other random trivia is that this project, Plasmic itself, actually started off not targeting React at all. It was Vue of all things, and but we decided actually let's focus on React and just get that right, because by the numbers, React has a much larger audience. Yeah. But I have a very special place in my heart for Vue as well.
Absolutely. But yeah, no, if you do a Google Trends search, I think React is crushing it.
Yeah.
So next up, as far as questions go, so you did with the hot reloading functionality that you did, where you were editing the UI in Plasmic and it was rendering directly on the screen almost immediately. Is this just for prototyping, or do you actually download what you've created when you want to deploy?
So yeah, what is being crafted in the designer is actually output as real code components that
Sure.
you are importing into your own code base. So that is, here I can show
So
in my.
where I'm going with this, is there a dependency to rely on the Plasmic servers in production?
No, there isn't.
All right.
So basically, after you are crafting these components, you can actually just walk away with the code directly. Like, here they're actually just dumped into source components by default, but you can change where that goes. So that's kind of why my Git is dirty now, and it has all these files produced in there. So yeah, this from here it goes through your normal Git merge and CI/CD and everything. So there's no other like dependency on us. You can walk away, and that's actually something that's really important to us. Is like what we're calling zero lock-in. Is just making sure that you feel comfortable with like walking away with the code. And this even applies to the presentational library scheme that I was talking about. Like these not this one, not the direct edit, because here you see all the JSX directly in front of you, but like in the one where we generate the dumb presentational components for you. Those are like black box components that you can pop out, but for those we're actually right now working on an inject functionality where you can actually take that and rewrite that into like plain JSX as if it was never like a black box at all.
Awesome. So I think you said that, and I'm just asking questions, waiting to see if anyone else. I think everyone's shy to ask a question because
No
the
worries.
whole world's going to see it.
Also, don't worry about dumb questions or anything like that. This is always my favorite part. Is just it's just the discussion aspect and answering questions. Yeah.
So I think you said, if I understood this correctly, animations were on your roadmap, right?
Yeah.
So what else is on the roadmap in the near future?
In the near future, yeah. So I think besides animations, really, we just pushed out our Figma plugin. So we want to beef that up as well. Not necessarily like the conversion aspect itself. I think we've actually covered a lot of ground just with the low level conversion of Figma's document representation to like standard web based ones, but more like giving you refactoring tools on top so that you can do these like mass changes throughout your designs and replace all like in Figma you might have your button component in all of its states represented as distinct components, or even not even components, just like random shapes floating around. So you might want to take those and actually coalesce them together into the same component as different variants, or different and delineate parts of those as slots. And that's actually what we're super interested in doing is like adding that kind of refactoring functionality on top. I think that'll be really powerful. The other big thing landing soon is cross project dependencies. So right now, everything in this well, even this one, but anyway, the to-do MVC project, it's all like one project. But if you are building a lot of these different surfaces that maybe all depend on like the same design system or some component or icon library or something like that, it can be convenient to factor those out actually into a standalone library. And so that's also something that we've been working on. And I think I also mentioned the last thing is just code components support. So being able to bring in your existing code components into the designer.
Awesome. This is fantastic. So we'll give it a few more minutes for questions to trickle in. I'll jump over to some logistical stuff for the group. Since I don't oh wait, actually I see a comment come in. All right, I think it's just a statement. But it's a good one. Are you watching the Twitch as well?
I'm just pulling it up now. This actually adds a lot of value to Figma as a production designer. I've been Figma hesitant because I have to get working code going ASAP and React all the better. Yeah, I think that's exactly what we want to enable is I guess this is not something I explicitly stated, but we're not out to replace Figma or any sort of freeform vector drawing tool. We actually see this as being really complementary to that. So a UI builder that focuses a lot more on production and takes your the rough and exploratory, messy designs that you create in Figma. And let you refine that into something that's like lasting and hygienic and robust. This is what we're all about. So I think we're excited about our partnership with Figma on that front, and they've been very very nice to us so far. Let's see. Any other questions here?
Not yet. Can I have you navigate to tracydevs.com? Because I don't have a scene in Open Broadcaster Studio to share my screen, unfortunately. So just on your screen.
We'll
some logistical stuff here.
Sorry, what was the URL?
tracydevs.com.
Oh, Tracy Devs.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. So as far as the group goes, so the next meetup is supposed to be the resume building workshop. So this one is probably going to get shuffled around again because it probably doesn't make sense to do this one on a Twitch stream for privacy reasons and things like that. And I couldn't find a recruiter that was willing to give an educational session on technical resumes for the current job market. With COVID stuff happening right now, it may not be the best time for this. So we'll probably reschedule this, and I'll probably try to fill in to see if I can find somebody to do what are we in August for that month? Yeah, August. So if you or somebody else want to give some kind of technical presentation for the Tracy Developer Meetup, now's your chance. This is a great way to build up your professional profile and portfolio. This is a good way to market your brand. There's a lot of benefit in this, and you don't need to be a professional presenter to present to this group. Nobody is gonna harass you or anything like that. We're all very welcoming. So if you do want to fill that position, let me know. Otherwise, the other sessions, like I said, they're all going to be happening on Twitch this year. Until 2021, we'll reevaluate in-person events. Definitely want to do in-person events. I want to treat those as the priority as soon as we can, because it's great for networking. It's great for building a community. Like a question was in the chat, are we planning on recording these events? I try to record all of them. Sometimes we run into issues. Sometimes the presenters, if they don't want to be recorded, that's fine as well. But we do what we can. Don't think we're receiving any more comments in the chat. Is there anything else you want to add, Yang?
No. Thank you so much for organizing this again, and just the opportunity to share this. This was fun.
Yeah. So tracydevs.com if you're interested. And again, Yang gave a great presentation on Plasmic. So plasmic.app, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Awesome. Thanks for everyone tuning in. Have a great weekend.